Anya pushed open the glass door of the bookstore and stepped inside, as if she was running from her own thoughts, furiously pulling her coat from her shoulders and tossing it over the empty leather armchair beside the desk. Her chest thundered, her heart pounding so hard it felt as though it might shatter her ribs. And in her mind, uninvited and relentless, the memories of only a few hours earlier began to swarm again. She lifted her hands to her face, pressing her palms against her cheeks, as if she could stop the avalanche of images breaking loose inside her. But they kept coming, merciless and vivid, refusing her even a moment's reprieve. She saw him before her, felt his touch still burning on her skin, heard his breath against her neck, as though it was all happening again. Her legs trembled beneath her, forcing her to lean on the edge of the table, searching for balance while she tried desperately to slow her breathing and calm the storm within her. In that white, sterile hospital room, while he was still battling pain and struggling to regain his strength, neither of them had been able to resist what had grown between them, the pull, the longing, the need that had become stronger than reason, fear, or any warning that it was neither the time nor the place. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, mercilessly revealing every motion, every breath, yet they hadn't cared if someone might walk in, condemn them, or tear them apart. In that instant, there had been only the two of them, both wounded, and yet, for each other, the only possible cure. All they had needed was the presence of the other, as if in that meeting of bodies, there was a strength that made survival possible. Anya gripped her dress in her fist, her fingers clutching the fabric, as though she could hold back the tears, threatening to spill, knowing that once they came, they would wash away all the fragile walls she had tried to keep standing. She had to find a way to steady herself, to step back, to return somehow to the ordinary, but she didn't know where to begin, nor how long she would have to pretend that nothing had happened. Yet his name escaped her lips nonetheless, this time barely audible, a whisper that sounded more like a prayer than a simple utterance. There was a special kind of intimacy in feeling safe beside someone, in realizing that you no longer needed to hide your fears or your frailties, and that was what broke her the most. She was already sinking into him, already dissolving, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She didn't understand how he had managed to shake her so deeply, how he could awaken every nerve, every pulse within her, as though he had roused a woman long asleep inside her. At moments, she could almost hear his footsteps approaching, and could sense his familiar scent lingering in the air, so vividly that her heart skipped a beat. She knew she would have to bite her lip to suppress a smile if she ever saw him again. And then she felt a hand, warm, firm, wrapping around hers and pulling her out of the whirlpool she had been drowning in. She didn't know if she was imagining it, dreaming it, or confusing reality with illusion, not until she felt her palm pressed against the solid rhythm of a chest she knew too well. Only one body could feel that familiar. Only one presence could call her back from the edge of her own mind. How had she not heard the door open? How could she have missed the sound of footsteps echoing toward her? Had she been so lost in her own thoughts that she'd severed her connection to the world? Fred's gaze locked onto hers and did not let go, though she looked straight through him at first, unable to believe he was truly there. He was alive, standing before her, and she hadn't imagined him. Her heart struggled to keep pace with the moment, stumbling faster and faster until she finally blinked and met his eyes for real. Everything inside her shattered then. Her breath, her control, her composure, and all that remained was the wave of longing that mirrored the one she saw in his eyes. Heartbeats were strange things. She knew that. They were supposed to be steady, rhythmic, moving blood from one chamber to the next, sustaining life through arteries and veins. That was the scientific truth. But one look and one touch were all it took to unravel her. He was the one who had made her heart skip a beat from the very first moment he'd drawn her close and brushed his lips against her neck, all the way to this instant, now, when he stood before her once more. "Anya," he said softly, and every vein in her body seemed to tremble in answer, as if lightning had struck through her and set fire to everything it touched. "Fred," she gasped, but before she could voice all that pressed on her tongue, warnings, protests, words she couldn't yet face, he silenced her with his presence, with the same quiet defiance of every boundary that stood between them. A smile flickered on her lips, faint, fragile, but real, before fading again. She knew she wasn't alone in what she felt. He, too, had built his walls, worn his mask, tried to restrain what threatened to upend everything, but no facade could last forever. "My mind told me I had to come to you. You should be resting, Fred. How did you manage to—" Her words faltered, shock crossing her face. fear flickering just beneath it, because the thought of losing him again was unbearable. He looked at her, his gaze tracing the line of her body, lingering on the curves, on the dress that fit her as if it had been made for this moment, and every glance of his ignited the fire she was fighting so hard to smother. She knew now, more clearly than ever, that her heart would always race for him, that no wall, no mask, and no denial could save her from that truth. He was, and would always be, her unrest, her curse, and her salvation. He leaned toward her, but she raised her hand and stopped him, with that simple, quiet motion, one that awakened confusion in him, with that thin trace of fear that hides well until it flickers in the eyes. He didn't understand why she stopped him, yet in her gaze, he saw the reflection of his own unspoken fears, those he rarely dared to admit, even to himself. He was afraid of the same thing she feared, that one day he would become too much, that he would exhaust her or hurt her, that he would lose her because of a decision he never wanted to make. He had a daughter who looked up to him, who needed him to be a guide, an example. And yet now, here, in this fragile moment, when his hand found her back and rested exactly where he once felt the pulse of life, she felt herself coming alive again. He drew her closer, and his voice, low and uncertain, broke the silence between them. "Ani?" he asked, as if he feared everything that might follow. "Yes, Fred?" she replied, carefully shaping her voice, gathering courage for every word that might escape her lips. His face was close now, his breath brushing hers, his lips almost touching, but still he hesitated, searching in her eyes for permission she had already given in every trembling glance. "I can't stop this. Will you just kiss me already?" she whispered. And in that soft, breathless sentence, there was no fear, no hesitation, only longing that tore down every wall between them. He didn't need to be told twice. His lips crashed against hers with such force that she lost her breath, and in an instant she found herself pressed against the table, surrendered to a kiss that silenced every conscious thought. Control was a word from another world, distant and meaningless. There were only him and her, their lips melting into endless waves and hands that didn't know where to stop. Her fingers slid along his arms, over his chest, down to his waist, and her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it would betray her. The rush of blood in her ears was like a storm, yet Fred was the storm itself, the dizzying rush she never wanted to end. His kisses broke her and remade her all at once, left her breathless and yet yearning for more. His hand found hers, their fingers entwined, and the soft brush of his thumb across her palm awakened a new surge of desire, a quiet, wordless sense of belonging. It was in those small things, those seemingly simple gestures, that she remembered why she was his and why she could never let him go. The way he held her hand, the way he kissed her slowly, as if time itself had ceased to exist, the way his body already knew the path of hers, and every path ended in a sigh she could not contain. "I need you," she heard him whisper hoarsely, as his lips brushed along her cheek, over her ear, and down to her neck, where he left a brief, trembling kiss that made her shiver. She had always known her neck was her weakness, that even the faintest breeze could send a chill through her, and now, under the warmth of his touch, every nerve in her body was awake, and every barrier quietly undone. "Oh God, Fred," she breathed, unable to hold his name back from her thoughts. "I need you too." Her words stirred in him the same quiet hunger he had been trying to contain, but could not. His hand moved down along her leg, lifting it around his waist, then the other, holding her close as he stepped back until they sank onto the couch in her bookshop. She sat in his lap, looking at him through eyes heavy with longing, yet still clear enough to see the way he was looking at her. His gaze was dark and steady, thick with yearning, so tangible she could almost feel it against her skin. His fingers traced the curve of her thigh, brushing the edge of her dress, gathering the fabric as though he was afraid to let go. His breath mingled with hers, rough and uneven, meeting her own in that fragile, suspended space between restraint and surrender. His hands, though strong, trembled faintly every time they touched her, and that small tremor, barely there, made her realize that he, too, was losing his footing, and that he needed her just as much as he needed him. Yet the moment his palms reached her hips, the trembling stopped, as if something within them both found peace there, at that quiet meeting point where their essences seemed to merge. She often wondered if a part of his being flowed into him, and a part of hers into him, as though only through that exchange could they both remain afloat. In that moment, as she felt his fingers tracing slow circles along her skin, she understood that he was writing something on her. She could not make out the shapes. The warmth and the swirl of feeling within her made it impossible to focus, but she sensed the meaning. It was as though he was writing invisible words. I love you. It was their secret language, a silent promise etched into her skin, a vow that he would stay, no matter what. She leaned in and kissed him, gently yet deeply, while her fingers moved across his jaw, feeling the rough edge of the stubble just beginning to grow, hearing the faint scrape beneath her nails. He loved when she did that, and she loved knowing that even in the smallest touch, she could bring him that quiet kind of happiness. His kisses seemed endless, and for her, each one was enough to lose herself completely and to forget the world beyond them. When his touch moved lower, finding the most fragile place within her, a breath escaped her lips, sharp and helpless. Her body answered him before she could think, drawn closer by something older and stronger than reason, and the sound he made in response, soft and broken, sent another shiver through her. She leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder, trying to breathe, though air seemed suddenly too heavy to take in. The world tilted, sound dissolved into a pulse in her ears, and every nerve in her body trembled like a string tuned too tight. She clung to him with everything she had, knowing she had already gone too far to turn back, and even less to let him go. Before she realized what she was doing, her hand had found him, guided by instinct rather than thought, by something wordless and ancient. Fred's breath brushed her ear, hot and uneven, and his lips found her neck, pressing a kiss that felt both gentle and claiming. He drew her closer, and she felt his heartbeat surge against her own, like two rhythms blending into one. Her quiet gasp filled the space between them, a sound born from the collision of desire and surrender. His answer came through the steady strength of his hands at her hips, firm yet careful, every motion carrying the same tenderness with which he protected her, even as the world around them began to blur. Anya, he whispered her name, his voice carrying the quiet weight of a half-sacred vow, but she barely heard it. Her thoughts had scattered, unraveling like threads of smoke that vanished the moment you reached for them. Even the question of whether the door was locked drifted away, lost beneath the sound of metal sliding, soft and deliberate, as his fingers found the zipper along her back. The sound itself felt like a skipped heartbeat. Every touch traced down her spine, left her utterly powerless against him. She turned her face toward him, and the kiss that followed burned between them. Without breaking it, he drew the fabric of her dress downward until it pooled around her waist, leaving her standing before him unguarded and luminous. God, you're beautiful, he murmured against her skin, his lips finding the line of her neck, then her shoulder, leaving a trail of warmth that seemed to write devotion with every touch. She trembled, waiting for what would come next, and his hands answered her, gentle and reverent, mapping the curve of her body with a patience that felt both tender and unbearable. Every movement carried restraint, every breath a promise, and though she could feel the hunger in him, there was something deeper beneath it, awe. When their eyes met, time seemed to contract. What she saw there wasn't just desire, but a longing shaped by years of distance and silence, as if every lost moment between them had rushed back at once. It was the look of a man seeing both the first and the last glimpse of the same soul. That look undid her. Her lips curved into a slow, daring smile, and when she pressed her palms against his chest, guiding him gently backward, his faint protest melted into a quiet surrender. Laughter rose between them then, soft, unguarded, shy in its joy, as her fingers found the buttons of his shirt, undid one by one, until the fabric slipped from his shoulders like something that no longer had the right to hide him. Anya laid her hands against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, fierce and alive, as though it beat for her alone. Her fingertips brushed the place where a scar marked his skin, and she touched it with care, with the kind of tenderness that holds both pain and strength in the same breath. It isn't fair, she whispered, her lips barely grazing his skin. I come apart every time you look at me like that. Fred smiled, a look half playful and half prayerful. I'm not complaining, he murmured. I'm only looking at what already belongs to me. Her spine shivered at his words. They weren't flattery, but truth, heavy with all the years of waiting, of silence, of what had been lost and finally found again. Her fingers traced their slow path down his chest, her touch both searching and remembering, as though she could reclaim every moment they'd been denied. When she leaned in to kiss the place just below his ear, the sound that left his chest was deep and unrestrained, a sound she had always loved because it told her more than words ever could. You like that, don't you? She whispered, though she already knew the answer. It came in the way his hands tightened around her, in the tremor beneath her touch, in the silence that grew heavy with meaning. You know, his voice was rough, thick with feeling. You know what you'll love even more? He drew her closer then, his hands moving with a kind of reverence, as though every inch of her skin were sacred. His touch was not hurried, not demanding, but careful, adoring, like someone tracing a familiar map that he'd dreamed of for years. The closeness between them became almost unbearable, not because of need, but because it felt like something larger than desire. Two pieces, finally joined again after being torn apart. Her hands found his face, his jaw, the curve of his brow, memorizing him all over again. Her fingers brushed the faint stubble along his cheek, grounding him in the present, even as the world outside fell away. He whispered her name like a prayer, soft and unsteady, and each time it left his lips, it sounded like a confession he'd carried too long. She didn't answer with words. Her response came in the warmth of her palms, in the depth of her gaze, in the nearness that spoke louder than any vow. When their lips met again, it was not a kiss of haste or hunger, but of recognition, two lives finally arriving at the same breath. It was slow, reverent, and infinite, a kiss that didn't seek to conquer, only to remember. And when they finally melted into one another completely, when every breath was shared and every heartbeat answered, the world beyond them ceased to exist. The past no longer held power, and the future had no shape. There was only this moment, raw, luminous, and unguarded. Two souls, stripped of everything but love.
Her forehead rested against his shoulder, and her palm lay over his chest, tracing the rhythm of his fast, uneven heartbeat, a rhythm that revealed everything he didn't know how to say aloud. Her body was still trembling, but not from fear. It was the kind of trembling born from a flood of joy and quiet apprehension, from the overwhelming sense of finally being where she had always belonged. His arms held her tightly, though not possessively. There was both protection and surrender in that embrace, as if he knew that if he let her go for even a second, the world itself might shatter into small, irretrievable pieces. "You have no idea how much I missed you," he murmured, his words scattering into her hair, heavy with all the emotion he had tried and failed to keep under control. His voice was like a whisper breaking through a storm, vulnerable, yet steady, each note carrying the weight of the time they had spent apart. "And I missed you. Every day. Every hour," she answered through quiet tears of release, of finally being able to share with him everything that had been breaking her a little each day, making her breathe in halves. In the soft cracking of her voice, there was both pain and joy, and together they made the moment almost unbearably beautiful. They stayed like that, wrapped in a silence that spoke louder than 1,000 words, breathing as one, until their hearts found the same calm rhythm. Both knew they were no longer lost. They had found each other, and that realization spread through their veins like warmth after a long, frozen sleep. "Fred," she whispered his name the way one whispers a prayer, softly and longingly, as if she feared he might disappear if she spoke too loud. "Anya," he replied with the same gentleness, and in his voice she heard both fear and relief, both jest and gravity, everything that made him hers. "You are, somehow, both the hardest and the easiest person I've ever tried to find," he said with a smile that was both charming and broken, a smile carrying a quiet kind of vulnerability. "I need to tell you something. It's important." His tone suddenly turned serious, and though a flicker of unease pressed against her chest, she nodded, unwilling to interrupt him. "Oh, all right. What is it?" she asked, masking her apprehension behind curiosity. But he hesitated, as if her eyes had caught him, as if her gaze itself had cast a spell over him. In those blue depths, he lost every trace of reason. His thoughts scattered, the carefully chosen words he had rehearsed again and again on his way there simply dissolved, slipping away under the weight of her nearness. "Fred?" she said again, softly, gently, calling him back from somewhere between waking and dream. "Come on. The sooner you say it, the better you'll feel." Her words were a bridge pulling him back from the whirlpool of his mind. He managed a quiet laugh despite everything, squeezed her hand, and brushed a kiss over her lips tenderly, but full of promise. "I don't agree with the things you said before," he finally admitted, knowing his honesty might sting. He had never been good at hiding what he felt. Her eyes narrowed slightly, though she stayed calm. "Anya, I can't accept the idea of waiting and of you sacrificing yourself for me. I can't let you give up your life because of me." Her gaze dropped, teeth lightly catching her lower lip. It was clear she didn't want to face the weight of his words, searching instead for comfort in looking anywhere but his eyes. "I understood what you meant," he went on, softer now, as if he wanted to ease her worry. "You couldn't say yes to me, not truly, unless Matilda accepted you, and Kai accepted me. And that's exactly why I love you even more." His fingers slid gently along her face, lifting her chin so she would look at him. "We don't have to rush anything. We don't have to force it. We can build this slowly, when the children aren't here, when it doesn't burden them. They've been through enough already. I want you, but I also want their peace. The smile she gave him then was fragile, almost shy, yet warm enough to undo him completely. She pressed a soft kiss to the tip of his finger, such a small gesture, yet it made his heart leap. He knew in that instant that she was his, and he was hers. She kissed him again, slowly, and he responded with the kind of strength that could no longer be restrained. As she straightened her dress, she watched him fumble with the buttons of his shirt, misaligning the last few so badly that the fabric puckered unevenly. She couldn't hold back a laugh. Sitting down on his lap, she began to undo the buttons one by one, her eyes teasing him all the while. "I'll button your shirt," she whispered playfully, "and you can zip up my dress. Deal?" "Well, I'd rather let the dress fall to the floor again and do what my heart tells me to," he replied with a smile, "but I suppose I can help you fasten it instead." She laughed softly, and he hooked a finger beneath her chin, lifting her face toward his. Her gaze, the one that always disarmed him, met his, and the faint blush that colored her cheeks, the quiet glow of the moment, struck him deeper than he cared to admit. He drew her close, pressed a kiss to her lips, then to the tip of her nose, and her laughter, that sound he loved more than anything, spilled out again. When she stood, straightened her dress, and began to turn away, she felt the way his hands longed to hold her back, but stopped themselves, giving her space. Still, he couldn't resist for long. He stepped forward, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and pulled her gently against him. In that embrace, she felt the safety she had searched for all her life. "I see you've been taking good care of the flowers," he murmured, his eyes drifting toward the bouquet on her table. Anya turned her head, only then noticing the wilted tulips in the vase. Her eyes widened. That was you." Fred leaned in, his laugh soft and conspiratorial. His lips brushed just behind her ear as he whispered, "I'm glad I managed to play with your nerves a little. It started to annoy me," she admitted through a laugh, though her eyes still sparkled. "Sounds exactly like something I do," he replied, his voice tender and warm. She turned fully toward him then, and he placed his hands on her waist, carefully, as if holding something fragile enough to shatter at a careless touch. Their eyes met, and for a long while, neither of them needed words. "Does it hurt, Fred?" she asked at last, her voice filled with a concern she no longer knew how to hide. "A little," he admitted with a faint smile, "but it's nothing. I'll manage." Anya could still feel the warmth of his breath on her skin as they stood facing one another, caught in a moment that was both tender and heavy, because behind every touch and every word lingered the unspoken truth of his condition. Her eyes, still hazy from laughter and the echo of their kiss, now grew serious, full of worry she couldn't suppress. "We have to take you back to the hospital," she said quietly but firmly, her tone gentle yet resolute, as she shook her head slightly, as though trying to push away the thought that he could treat his health so lightly. "I can't believe you just walked out like that, without permission." Fred answered not with words but with touch. His hand, warm and strong despite everything he'd endured, lifted to her cheek. His thumb traced her skin, still flushed, not only from their closeness, but from the unease she felt for him. His gaze was calm, and his smile carried that effortless ease he always managed to summon, even in the hardest moments. "I didn't run away," he said, in a tone that was gentle, laced with humor, but also with something deeper. "I made a graceful exit." At that, despite herself, a small laugh escaped her, not loud, but precious, the kind that's born when someone touches the exact spot where your heart hides its softness. It was a laugh of relief and resistance all at once, as if she was defending herself against his charm, while silently admitting how much it soothed her. "Still," she said, her voice steadier now, though her smile lingered, "I'm taking you back. You shouldn't be here." Then Fred lifted his gaze, and in his eyes appeared that quiet, unwavering certainty, the kind that surfaced rarely, but when it did, felt like a vow. His voice was almost a whisper, yet it carried the full weight of truth. "On the contrary," he said, every word both soft and firm, "I think this is exactly where I've always wanted to be." In that instant, time stopped, their eyes met, and the world around them faded into silence, full, thick with meaning, suspended in that fragile space between breath and heartbeat, when everything becomes utterly clear. Fred tilted his head then, pressing his lips to hers, not with urgency, but with the tender depth of love born from memory, loss, and rediscovered hope. Anya parted her lips to meet his, receiving the kiss as if it was the most natural thing in the world, as though her very being had always known it belonged in that touch. When their lips finally parted, and their hearts still trembled in the rhythm of closeness, she remained leaning against him, her smile soft, but steady enough to hide the quiet unrest inside her. "But seriously, I'm taking you back to the hospital," she whispered,
her tone wrapped in warmth, despite the worry that colored her words. Fred chuckled, a low, accepting sound of understanding, as if he was thanking her for being the one to remind him of boundaries he so easily ignored. "All right," he said, and in that simple surrender, there was no trace of loss, only tenderness, the kind that says, "I trust you enough to let you decide for both of us."